While she was in there, or in the time between the Bentley arrest and that happening, she forgot to make the payments. A few weeks ago, I purchased one of my absolute dream cars, a 2006 Mercedes McLaren SLR. And I've always been open about the fact that despite the latest, greatest, coolest, newest, whatever latest supercar that people make, I have a particular affinity for supercars of the mid-2000s because that's the time when I was 15, 20 years old, and certainly they were the coolest thing in the world to me, and certainly I still love supercars, but there's something about those that to me is just about as cool as something can get. And I'd always loved the SLR for how different it was from the Courage GT and the Enzo, which it was kind of pitted against initially, and that it was an interesting alternative to a 599 or an LP640, but obviously an insanely expensive car at the time. This one had a $463,000 MSRP, and it was actually described as Paris Hilton's $500,000 Mercedes by most of the publications that wrote about it. That's right, Paris Hilton, the star of The Simple Life, a DJ by some approximation, a music video star, and certainly one of the most famous popular culture icons of the mid-2000s, was the original owner of this car. And she drove it a lot. She had a lot of interesting cars, several Bentleys that she was well known to have, a Lexus LFA even, multiple Ferraris, but she seemed to particularly love the SLR. And I talked in the first video that I made about it about a particular night in that car's life that made it particularly famous. It was a night when it was being driven around by Paris, but the passenger was Britney Spears and, for some time, Lindsay Lohan. And so it was particularly famous for something that happened around Britney Spears getting out of the car. You can watch that video to learn more about what an incredible night that was in this car's life and what I believe makes it the most famous McLaren ever built. But regardless of that, it popped up for sale a few weeks ago, and Tyler Hoover brought it to my attention, and I assumed he was going to be going out trying to buy it, but he said that he couldn't, and I said, well, I don't know that I can either, but I'm going to make a stab at it. And I would not have been able to do so were it not for Glossit. They are the sponsor of this video, and they definitely helped me to purchase this car. And today they've got a special offer where you can get a couple of bottles of their best detail sprays along with a free bottle of their tire shine. Now, I do love their detail sprays. It makes a car much easier to clean up quickly, and for somebody lazy like me, after the car's been cleaned the way that they did. In fact, Glossit intercepted the car on its way from California to Atlanta, and they did a 100-hour detail of the car, which honestly I never even thought was a thing that you could do, but it was very, very impressive, and when it showed up, it honestly looked brand new. Over the weekend, despite it being Georgia's pollen season, I took it to Caffeine and Octane, and everybody was wildly impressed with the condition of the paint on the car. They did a full correction, put all their coatings, all their cleaners, all the things on it, and it came out great, far beyond certainly anything I would have ever achieved. But again, now all I have to do is spray it with this after it gets dirty, and it looks great again. And so I do love that. However, I hate tire shine. I told Rich that when he told me this was part of their deal for today, and you can get 2 bottles of that, and they give you a free bottle of this. It's over $100 value for $49.95. But he promised me that when you put this stuff on, it doesn't sling all over everything, which is my personal hatred of most tire shines, and I have to say he was correct. It just stays on, it looks good, and it's not that hard to put on, fortunately. Some of them come with like 15 different steps, but you spray it on, you wipe it off, and it looks good. And so I have to say, I don't know that I'm converted, I don't know that I'm going to use it all the time, but it is good tire shine. And so be sure to check them out at the link in the description below. Again, the shipping is free, it's over $100 value, and it's just $49.95 if you act soon. So I definitely appreciate that, and I love that they supported me in buying one of my dream cars. And again, it was made more interesting by the fact that it was Paris Hilton's and that it was so well known for so many things at the time. Because you have to think about it, Paris was one of the first influencers, even before that was a term used in that kind of a context. And she was one of the most famous people on earth, appearing in all the tabloids, paparazzi following around, every kind of television, anything like that that you could imagine, she was there. So Paris drove this car all the time. She was seen and photographed in it all over the place. She drove by herself with all her friends, and it seemed like it was her favorite, even though she had a lot of truly amazing cars. The girl's got good taste. But on one fateful day, in fact, it was September 27th of 2006, she was driving, she said, on the way to In-N-Out to get some food, and she was pulled over. The police said that she was speeding and driving erratically, which I suppose could happen. The visibility is a little bit strange out of the car. The SLR gets criticized for a strange braking feel, strange handling feel, just really being a very, very strange car. But to me, I like it because there's just nothing else like it, and it's one of those iconic cars of the era. And so again, she was driving what they called her $500,000 Mercedes, and she gets pulled over. And the cops perform a field sobriety test, and they ask her to blow into a breathalyzer, and she blows a .08, which was the minimum threshold to be arrested. Now, you might think they just let one of the most famous people on earth go, but they decided not to do so. She was handcuffed on the roadside and arrested, and the SLR that day was impounded. Now, she was not kept. She was released on some bail or on her own recognizance or something like that. And so she was going to stand trial another day. And again, as a first-time offender, not a habitual DUI person, she thought, and most people thought, she'd probably just kind of get a slap on the wrist and go away. In fact, she was given a $1,500 fine and 3 years of probation. I think she could have done 40 hours of community service and got it down to 2 years of probation, according to one article that I saw. But regardless, it was a pretty big thing. And she also got a license suspension, which might have been as short as about 4 months, but that becomes very pertinent next in the story. So a few months later, she was seen driving around in her blue Bentley Continental GTC, and she was pulled over again, supposedly for speeding and potentially for driving without her headlights on. I guess that was either required due to some rain or it being at night. That wasn't clear from the articles that I saw. But regardless, she got pulled over, and the officer immediately realized that she was driving on a suspended license. The Bentley gets impounded, she gets arrested, she's violated a term of her probation, and she has to stand trial for that offense. And so that happens a short time later. And again, the thought was maybe she gets some house arrest or another slap on the wrist, like this is Paris Hilton for crying out loud. But that's not what happened. The prosecutor decided to go full bore, and after being convicted, she was sentenced to 45 days in jail. And obviously she was quite upset to have this happen. She was not, in her approximation, the kind of person to go to jail, but that is in fact what happened. And so she went to jail in 2007, not for the full 45 days, but for a pretty considerable part of it. They said she'd let her out early for, I guess, good behavior and overcrowding and things of that nature. But regardless, she's talked a lot about the time she spent in jail. Now, that would be a very entertaining end to the story. If she spent some time in jail, the car had already been impounded, she got a DUI in it. Many, many iconic photos were taken in this car. But no, in fact, it appears that while she was in there, or in the time between the Bentley arrest and that happening, she forgot to make the payments on her SLR. And several magazines reported that she had a $400,000 loan against the SLR, which would have been a really, really high loan to value at the time. I guess she had good credit, or at least a good co-signer. But regardless, she owed a lot of money and she missed at least 2 payments. I would have imagined it had to be probably 3 to get a car repossessed at that time, unless she missed the first payment, which is usually, by most loan agreements, ground for repossession. But regardless, the car was absolutely repossessed sometime late in June of 2007. That was reported to Carfax around that time. It seemed to make the rounds in media publications just a few weeks after that. But it did go to, I guess the lien holder was in Central or South Florida, and it was sold to the second owner in Florida as well. And so it stayed there for a little while, bounced around a few times, and eventually I got to own it. And so, you know, you never expect to own a car that was that famous, that was somebody got a DUI in, but ultimately it ended up being a totally fine car despite being impounded, repossessed, and perhaps not having the easiest beginning of life. And so I've been driving it absolutely as much as I can. It's an amazing car. It's the best driving SLR that I've ever been in. The brakes to me work just fine. It is hard to see out of and tell where the corners of it are, but it's something that you get used to. And I hope to enjoy many, many more miles on it. I think it's a perfect complement to the other cars that I have and love, but it's very unique, it's very awesome, and I'm having an awful lot of fun with it. And to me, the crazy stories like this just add to what the car is and what kind of an experience you can have in it. And so I'd like to thank Paris for making the car's first month so interesting, and I'd like to thank Glossit for their support of this video, for their support of the car, and I'd love for you to check out their website at the link in the description below to get their special offer for today. You get 2 bottles of their premium detail sprays as well as a free bottle of their tire gloss for just $49.95 including shipping. It's more than $100 value, and it's a great way for you to thank them for their support of VINwiki and get some great stuff to take care of your car. So be sure to check them out at the link in the description below, and have a great day.